Right, there we go. We're all set up. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Dr. Lyle Ungar. He is a professor of computer and information science at University of Pennsylvania. He holds appointments in psychology, bioengineering, genomics, and computational biology, and operations, information, and decisions. Wow, there's a lot there. So he has published over 400 articles, supervised 24 Ph.D. students, and is a co-inventor on 10 patents. Wow. His group uses natural language processing and explainable AI for psychological research including analyzing social media and cell phone sensor data to better understand the drivers of physical and mental well-being. They're currently building social emotionally sensitive GPT-based tutors and coaches. All right, so we'll hear about his work today on how to build LLM-based chatbot for mental health. And he'll explain all about what that is, large language models. So take it away. Thank you so much for being here.
Cool. And since we're a small group, in spite of not being physically together, which is always disappointing but hard, do feel free to interrupt with questions and comments, and we can have a discussion. And I'm going to do a little bit of a bait and switch in the sense that I'd like to tell you how to build a really great therapy bot, but nobody's really built one yet. So what I'm going to do is sort of say where we're trying to go. And I'm going to talk a lot about bots for education, K-12 education, where I'm building lots of bots for things that are more like coaching than they are like therapy. But I think it tells us a picture of where things are, and we'll look a lot at Khan Academy's Khanmigo, which is a tutoring bot for high school kids, because I think in some sense, education is starting to get where therapy will be in 5 years. And the other piece is, I am my home department. Behind me, I'm in computer science. And I think understanding a bit how these things work and how they don't work is sort of interesting to get a flavor of what's going on. So with that, let me see if I can share my screen. Cool. Hopefully you now see a slide that looks like a title slide.
We do. Thank you.
Awesome. Cool. So I'm going to do a quick introduction, just sort of talking about what's out there with current mental health chatbots. And then we'll get a little more into the details, not super into the weeds, but a little bit of a bunch of things that are being done inside chatbots to make them work better. So I'm sure you've all noticed, but it's stunning how many friend bots, chat bots, coach bots, therapy bots are out there. The largest one is Replica. How many people have known Replica? It'd be fun to play with these things. This is, I quote, the AI companion who cares, always there to listen and talk, always on your side. It's not a therapy bot. It's just a friend bot. But a number of people find it a very good friend and get very pissed if they change it. There are other places like Pi, which is another super friendly personal AI, which is a good example of personas. There are, of course, a vast number of porn bots. I picked the one that I most recently got spammed by, which wants me to be her Valentine. Sweet. In the bottom left is sort of the one really successful chat bot, which is used in the therapy space, which is Woebot. People know Woebot? This is great. Yeah, the one who runs it is great. And so what it is something that is a CBT-based bot. They are currently running clinical trials for FDA approval. And I think what's interesting about them is they are not a large language model or GPT-based bot. And if you look at their homepage in the bottom left, I quote, "Everything Woebot says is carefully scripted by our team of content writers and clinicians." So they got nothing that's generated by large language models. It's a chat bot that helps you do CBT, that does CBT for you. They're looking these days primarily at maternal depression as the first treatment area, but they're rolling out a bunch of these things. But everything is handwritten. This is what the bot will say now. Logic scripts. It does not generate. It does not personalize. It walks you through it as it should be. And that makes them feel very comfortable. And it makes it, they'll be the first ones for sure to have FDA approval. They're the only bot I know in clinical trials at the moment for FDA approval. And then there are a bunch of other sort of more dubious coaching bots. I picked one randomly, which again came through my advertising stream, Maya transforming relationships using AI. To be clear, I'm not endorsing any of these except for Wobot. Questions, comments about sort of the space of bots out there?
Just a reflection that that I didn't know that you could do an AI friend. So that's new to me. Interesting. There's so many implications about that, and thinking about
It's
who accesses, that kind of technology.
my biggest hope and concern is that I think the same way that we raised a generation of children, my daughter's generation, who grew up on social media, we're now about to raise a generation of children, that would be your generation, Heather, children who are going to be talking to friends. Their best friend will be a bot. The bot will help them confide in their problems. It'll help them work through stuff. It'll give them advice on their homework and their relationships. It will not be a therapist mostly, but it's going to be hard to tell where the coach boundary goes from the therapy boundary. And the coaches are completely unregulated. The therapy is quite tightly regulated, which just means there'll be lots of coaches and fewer therapists. And as I work, and we'll see examples of Khan Academy, which I'm working a little bit with, these bots that do tutoring that teach children how to do math, increasingly the hardest part of math is not actually knowing how to do the division. It's how do you overcome the math anxiety? It's how do you get yourself motivated to study? And so these bots that are very factual, helping your kid study their math, which is awesome, by the way, are going to be also coaches, if not therapists, in helping them deal with the problems that are distracting them from their math. So I see in the very short order, huge numbers of sort of things that are not therapy bots coming into everyone's lives, but particularly children.
Fascinating, but also a little scary, right?
Yeah, my hope is not that my daughter's best friend ends up being a bot. This is not what I wish for her. She's old enough that that's her generation. I mean, she just turned 21. That's not her problem, but it's going to be her children's problem. Cool. So on the digital therapy space, most of the bots are trying to do things that are quite structured, mostly cognitive behavioral therapy. I mentioned Wobot, which is currently in clinical trials for FDA approval. There is another successful, these are all for-profit companies, Listen, which tries to help. One of the problems with running clinical trials is you ask the therapist to follow some protocol, and she doesn't, because she knows better what the teacher, what the patient needs than the protocol. And so therapists have a habit of doing what they think is best and not following the protocols, making it impossible to really test a protocol. And so a very protocolized therapy, it's hard to enforce this. And Listen is building bots that help listen to, pun intended, the therapist client interaction and tell whether the therapist is following the evidence-based practice. Cool. Finally, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm consulting for a startup called Gemini, which is building chatbots to do text-based anxiety treatment. Their view is that there will be therapists who actually run the process, make the larger plan, monitor it, but that it's expensive to have a therapist that's available 7/24 for interactions anywhere, anytime. And places like Wobot have found that people like to be able to check in with their therapist and when they have a problem, rather than waiting for that once a week thing. And by the way, places, not so much in the US, which is pretty opposed to text-based therapy, but in England, Britain, the NHS does a fair amount of text-based therapy with humans, and it seems to work pretty well. The NHS is reasonably evidence-based, and they're finding fairly good results of delivering therapy via text message rather than Zoom or in person, which is by far dominant in the US. I mean, dominant in the UK too, but not as, here it just seems to be anathema. We're not allowed to do texting. It wouldn't be the same, which is not quite true. My sister is a licensed psychologist and does text-based therapy, but she's unusual. and she's in the US. Cool. There are also groups, I'm working a little bit with a group at Stanford, led by Shannon, doing cognitive restructuring chatbots. Super cool. I was slightly appalled to learn that when we train psychotherapists, they practice on real humans. It's like getting a beginning dentist or a beginning doctor. It's like, yeah, okay. I don't really want to be the first person in the dental school. And so what we've been building are, we meaning Shannon leading it, but a group building digital patients. So this will be a detailed description of here's a patient, 25-year-old woman presenting with this piece, a whole backstory, how she's dealing with her roommates, what's going on in her life, her relationships. We give all that backstory to the large language model. It then generates an artificial person, which the therapist can then talk to. The therapist is a student, a psychology student in training, clinical psychologist. So we have a digital patient, and then we have actually some idea of what should be done according to the protocol they're learning. Again, this is highly protocolized therapy. And then a second bot that actually gives feedback so that the student can interact, ask questions of the bot, and get feedback from the teachers. I tried it. I was surprised how good it was. I'm not a very good therapist, never having been trained. And it was interesting to get feedback about what I was doing and not doing right when I worked with the bot, whereas hopefully no one would have exposed me to an actual person to do therapy with them. Finally, there are a bunch of pieces that are farther away from mental health, but again, the NHS in Britain, 70% of the people who go in for therapy refer themselves. And the question that they asked was, can we build a bot that will help people decide, should I be seeing therapy? What sort of therapy should I get? Do I need this? And their trial was fairly successful. I think that people liked it, and particularly people of slightly marginalized communities, gay community, more likely to feel happy having a bot to talk to give advice rather than going through the standard intake protocol system. And we're now trying to see if we can roll the same thing out to India, where there's a lot more stigma against mental health treatment than there is in the US and England. And again, not to do therapy, but merely to have a bot that someone can talk to say, hey, what's going on in your life? What resources are available? What concerns might you have? I certainly been struck when I talk to students at Penn, the level of knowledge is incredibly uneven. The undergrads at Penn, everybody's either on SSRI or their best friend is. They're completely knowledgeable about all of them, the side effects. I talked to students from China, same socioeconomic status. These are students at Penn, right? And they're like, I don't want to take a drug. What are these SSRIs because of the side effects? And I'm going, do you know what the side effects are? And they're going, no, but they got to be bad, right? So the cultural difference in knowledge is tremendously variable, even within the US. And so I think having bots that are adjuncts to therapy is super useful. Let me again pause and see if people have questions, comments, observations.
Seems like a blurry line between therapy and what you're talking about. Is the dividing line sort of whether whoever's making it wants to make a therapy claim / indication / get paid by insurance, or?
That's exactly correct. The big company, the big for-profits, mostly the Wobots and Gemini, the money is being reimbursed for therapy, right? Being paid either by a hospital system or by a employer's insurance or something where you're covered, so you're paid. So to actually get paid, you have to be approved. As I say, no one is approved, but Wobot is close to offer services as a coach. You can do whatever you want. I'm a coach, Daniel. I'm here to help you deal better with your life. Of course, I don't have a degree in psychology. There's no regulation for those. So I think you're precisely right that it's largely, and I'm very much in an American context, but hey, we're in America, I'm American. This is sort of, in the US at least, there's this hard line where if you're offering therapy, then you need to have a license, either a licensed social worker or Ph.D. in psychology or other similar degrees. There's a whole structure for giving therapy. You're supposed to give diagnoses that go on your reimbursement form. Whereas if you're a coach or anything else, a college counselor, then nothing, there's no regulation.
Have you seen anything about what kind of liability a actual therapist or psychiatrist like myself takes on if they suggest a coach to a patient?
No, I haven't. The people that I know who are psychologists all have insurance, which I assume you have I hope you have liability insurance.
I just don't know, like,
But what happens if you
it's not
suggest someone? I
standard
have
of
no idea.
care. It's not standard of care, but it sounds like it might be helpful. So if I say to my patients, hey, this is not FDA approved, but you might find it helpful. Anyway, I hear you saying
It's
you
a
don't know.
huge problem. And I think what I see a lot throughout Penn's medical system when I talk to it, doctors are increasingly recommending bots, mostly not for mental health, but for physical health.
Mhm,
Bots to help you do diabetes management,
mhm,
websites that have information about your post-operative care. There's 1,000 bots coming online to give advice on everything conceivable.
mhm.
And the hospital system so far has no procedure for checking, validating. One hopes that the psychologists or MDs who are recommending these have played with them and have some sort of usage. They're not even vetted for simple things like privacy. What data is being collected? Are these things, if they're not a bot, if they're not a therapy bot, they're not required to be HIPAA compliant,
Yeah,
right?
I got an email saying I'm not allowed to use ChatGPT for clinical care. It didn't specify in what capacity I'm not allowed to do it. It just said not allowed. So
Yeah,
I
and mostly
presume
the
that
medical,
I
yeah,
presume that's mostly around them not wanting me to put a bunch of information about my patients into, ChatGPT's maw, but
yeah. And that's something that companies are, and Penn is just gradually moving to figure out, but mostly doesn't understand. There are some uses of GPT where anything you upload, they own, which is a clear HIPAA violation if you're putting information there. There are some ones where you run it through Microsoft and it's HIPAA compliant, and Penn has agreements in place with Microsoft, but not with
mhm,
OpenAI. With Microsoft, where Microsoft will deliver HIPAA compliant services to us through their Azure platform, but nobody quite gets it. And so the hospital system is fairly reasonably a little nervous about you being sloppy and pasting in a clinical note to find some information about it, which people do, and not making sure that you respect the patient privacy. So they don't trust you to make the right decision.
makes sense. Thank you. Sorry, I don't want to derail you too far off.
Well, no, but the point of the conversation is to be derailed.
Okay. Well, then thank you for letting
Cool.
me derail.
Not much about it, but we just learned this morning about Penn's AI chat that apparently is HIPAA compliant that just came out. I don't know if you saw the announcement a couple of weeks ago.
No.
Yeah, apparently it's GPT-4 is coming out, and that's going to be HIPAA compliant. So I think the
Cool.
idea we learned was that that you would put in, a patient's or client's symptoms, and it would spit out like a diagnosis or a treatment plan. So apparently that's coming soon.
Cool. And I've got to say, everybody, you should all be playing with GPT. It's remarkably good and remarkably bad. And it's hard to tell where it's good or bad without trying it. But, there are a bunch of studies that show that it gives just as accurate, but much more empathetic and friendly notes than doctors do, and is often pretty much human level at diagnoses of all sorts of things. So and then sometimes it's just stupid crap. So, trust but verify, I think Reagan said. But in any case, in this case, maybe don't trust but use but verify. Cool. So I'm going to blaze through a whole bunch of different pieces that go into building large language models. And mostly what I want to do is to give you a little flavor of how large language models think. And I don't know if you've seen Alien. There's this great short story by Ted Chiang where we contact aliens and they think differently than we do, different way of structuring the world. The original short story is much clearer about this than the movie. But But these are alien intelligences that are superhuman in some ways and really dumb in other ways because they just think differently. And so to get used to working with this other alien is something that is, I think, is going to be a part of your life. You're going to have this alien assistant looking over your shoulder. You'll ask it questions. It'll suggest stuff. And to start to think about how this weird alien GPT thinks, I think is going to be useful. Cool. And I'll talk a little bit about Conmigo as a case study where education is ahead of therapy. So there are a bunch of large language models. And I think the thing to note is at the moment, there are basically 3 in the world that are roughly the same: GPT-4, Gemini, and Claude. They're all big, expensive. They all do everything. They take text in, they put text out. What more shall I say? You can't run them on any machine that we have at Penn because they're big. And then there's a bunch of small large language models of the GPT 3.5, and they have names like Llama or Mistral. And there's tens of thousands of startups in the US and tens of thousands globally more that do all sorts of specializations. Things like summarizing your notes, your patient notes, things like listening to your meeting and making recommendations, whatever, things like being friends to you or your kids, things like recommending restaurants and cheeses to people. So there's a million little startups, some of them accessing the big models, some of them using the small models. The big models really are better. So it's something to think about. If you're playing with GPT, the free version, realize that you got a dumb alien. There's a smart alien available for $20 a month, which may be worth playing with. I highly recommend, trying some of the more serious ones just because they're better. And people are using it for lots of stuff. People in the medical school who do bioinformatics mostly don't write Python anymore. They describe in English what they want, and the GPT writes the Python code that then does the plotting and data analyses in genomics. Lots of little annoying things like that. Recommendation letters. Can you guy know the med school has to write a lot of promotion letters? Feeds in. Here's the CV of the person. Here's my sample template of the last 5 promotion letters I've written. Write me a first draft. He doesn't trust it to be right, but it's better than giving it to his admin, and it's faster and cheaper and does a better job than admin in terms of the first draft of the promotion letter. So there's lots of stuff like that where there's either direct use of the bigger GPT, Claude, or customized systems. Again, questions?
I wish I knew that before doing a crash course in Python a couple of years ago.
Yeah, well, a couple of years ago it was different. And it's useful to know to think about it, but often if you dictate it and if it doesn't work, you give it, you then paste in the error message and say, hey, I got this error message, and then it fixes it for you. So often it requires a couple iterations, but it's remarkably good at basic Python programming. I'm a reasonable Python programmer, and I still just dictate to it because, hey, I can specify cleanly in English what I want.
It's amazing.
It's super amazing. Cool. So I want to show you, yeah. A little bit about Khan Academy. For those of you who don't have elementary or high school kids, Khan Academy is the place that has a bunch of YouTube videos that kids go when they can't understand their chemistry teachers. And it's increasingly being built into lots of American schools. And they have all sorts of different things where there are activities where you could ask it any sorts of questions and talk to it. And it's got chat bots behind it these days. They have things that will help tutor you in anything you want, from reviewing your AP exam to doing your math. Behind it is GPT-4, OpenAI. I'm not going to go through the usual big model. It's a big model, okay. But, Microsoft product specialized for that. What I do want to sort of is make sure people are on sort of the picture of how these large language models work and why that matters. So these models are unbelievably trivial in some sense. They take a sequence of words like a robot must, and then they predict what the next word should be, and it predicts the word exterminate, and the answer is no, it should be obey, and then it corrects it, and it readjusts its parameters, its weights in its big model, and it does this over trillions of words, and it's a big thing that, given a sequence of words, predict what word is likely to come next. And people who don't like it say it's just a stochastic parrot. It's a probabilistic thing repeating things it doesn't understand. I'm an engineer. I don't care if it understands. I care whether it does a reasonable job. It's really good at doing things like translate the following to Chinese, make the following shorter, summarize this document in 3 things, change this into poetry. It does a lot of things really, really well. It answers lots of my questions. What does this word mean? What's a hematoma? Explain it to me like I was a high school student. Explain it to me like I was a doctor. It's great at lots of those things, whether it understands or not. It's for me a philosophy question, and I'm not particularly interested in philosophy. It's just really good at doing things based on predicting the next word. You can do things that are all fun, like can you write a proof that there are infinitely many primes where every line rhymes, and it does a pretty good job. Or draw a unicorn in TIKZ, which is a weird programming language that doesn't have a lot of power. It does just amazing things.
I have
Yeah,
a question. Maybe you're going to get to
please.
it, but ChatGPT's responses don't seem like they come out one word at a time, meaning there's a structure to them. There's 3 paragraphs. It's like a good middle school essay always. That implies something more than just what's the next word. Is that superimposed on top of the next word, or does that actually
No,
fall out of
no,
the next word?
amazingly, there's nothing more than giving the next word. And because it's seen so many examples of wiki pages and things with bullet points and essays, it does a great job of doing structured outputs. But in spite of that fact that it's doing these beautifully structured outputs, it's still generating them 1 word at a time. It generates 1 word, it takes everything, including the last word it does, it generates the next word. So unbelievably, in spite of the fact that it's generating 1 word at a time, looking at everything it's seen for that you've typed in and everything it's written so far, it generates the next word. In spite of its myopic view, it does an incredible job at doing well-structured 3-paragraph essays.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's nothing on top of it. Right? So it's great. And note that what's amazing is you can write a proof with infinitely many primes, rhyming the lines every time, generating 1 word at a time. You can write a 1-page college essay, 1 word at a time. But if you give it things where you need to plan ahead, write a short poem where the last sentence and the first sentence have the same words but in reverse order, palindrome sorts of things. If you ask it for palindromes or things where you have to think ahead, it doesn't get it. Because to write something like this, you'd have to figure out what's the first sentence, what's the last sentence, make something that makes sense. John saw Mary, Mary saw John. That'd be a good thing I would do. That would be the beginning and end, then I'd fill the middle in. It doesn't do that. It doesn't think ahead. And so things that require thinking ahead, oh crap, mostly if you're doing therapy, you're probably thinking ahead about where you're going. You're not just making up the word 1 word at a time as you go along. So things that require planning or thinking ahead at, it's surprisingly bad at, given how stunningly good it is at things that you can do 1 word at a time. The other thing, make questions on that? Daniel, that makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing it does, and the technical term is hallucinates, when it generates the next word based on the context, it generates things that are statistically plausible, and sometimes it's right, and sometimes it's not. So you can give it some facts about a patient and rewrite the data into a medical note using exclusively the information above. And what you will see is that it starts with things where the next word it generates after seeing this is A, and then 20, which actually is correct based on this history-year-old patient with a history of anorexia nervosa, correct. Depression is referred to us by and it goes on, and it generates lots of things, all of which are statistically likely given the background. And then it says something, she's severely underweight for her height, BMI of 16.6. No. She is severely underweight. We heard that. There's no information to calculate the BMI. We got the height, but not the weight. It just made up a statistically plausible piece. And 16.6 is certainly severely underweight. That's frightening, right? But it just made that up as a statistically plausible one, right? Signs of malnutrition make sense, low blood pressure. Okay, it's clever. We didn't say that she had signs of malnutrition, but nonetheless, it knows based on its historical training and reading the whole internet that in fact, low blood pressure and brachycardia are in fact signs of malnutrition. Clever of it. But she also reports feeling depressed and hopeless, which in fact is completely made up. It's statistically plausible that she might, but she didn't. This makes sense? It's both really good. It knows what signs of malnutrition are. It can recognize them. And it knows what underweight are in BMI. And it also just makes stuff up. And if you ask it, read the note, check that everything you did is correct. And it will say some things like, well, everything is there except for the BMI calculation. So after the fact, it can check and say, oops, I made up the BMI calculation. But, she also reports feeling depressed and hopeless, not containing the patient's facts. This is additional information from the patient's self-report. That's also false. It just made that up. So it's on the one hand really good at making up plausible, which is to say statistically likely information, given what we've seen before. On the other hand, the fact that it's plausible and statistically likely doesn't mean it's right. This makes sense? And it should be a little bit frightening because these things really look plausible when they generate summaries for you. And they can take large documents and summarize them. They can take short documents and expand them out. All the results look plausible because they're statistically likely. But it doesn't mean they're right. Cool. Let's look a little bit at prompts. The way you use these things is giving it some sort of a prompt. You tell it this, and it's going to auto-complete this. So I told it you're talking to a student who's learning English as a second language. And if you do that, it actually does a reasonable job of holding a conversation. It asks sensible questions. It goes on. It follows up. And again, it's generating one word at a time, the next word based on the preceding one. So when it's going to this point at the bottom, what did you find clever about the monkey's actions? It's statistically what's likely to come based on what it's seen before, which is me and the chatbot and me. And note that it's doing a good job of following up on my observation, right, as a high school student, having read about a clever monkey. Right? So it's surprisingly good. And it's great for holding conversations and teaching English. I'm building a chatbot to teach English as a second language to Indians. What do you put in? And you want the same thing for our therapy bots. Context. Who is the bot? Is it a fellow student? Is it a teacher? Is it a patient? Keep your responses short. It's been trained to give long answers. Do lots of information there. Give it lots of facts about what it shouldn't do. Do not use swear words because you're talking to kids. Kids have a habit of trying to swear at it and trick it to swearing, and it will imitate your style and match it. And statistically, if I'm swearing at you, you're more likely to swear at me. So it does that. So you can give it instructions. By the way, I've done this in all caps. Does it make sense for a computer? Does it matter if I just do something in all caps or not? And the answer is yes. Clinical trials, randomized trials show that it pays more attention to things in all caps because statistically on the data it's trained on, if I send you a message in all caps, you're most likely to follow and do the part I put in all caps, right? So its statistical training data does show that things in all caps most often are paid more attention to. So it's unbelievably human in all sorts of weird ways. We build in pieces which are important for therapy. If someone's talking about suicide, what do you do? So we give it lots of detailed instructions. It doesn't have a lot of common sense. It doesn't really know that in the context of a school or maybe even a doctor's piece, if you talk about therapy, if you talk about suicidal ideation, someone should do something about it. But note that my programming here is all in English. right? Long descriptions of what it should do. What am I trying to accomplish in this session? Once you have this, you can start to have the whole thing have sort of nice conversations that go on at some length, and it actually tries to pull out information from the student of whatever form I've told it to do. The other thing you can do a lot is give it examples. Give it a few examples. This is the sort of conversation I want. This is the sort of question and answer I want. And it's very good at learning from examples. Copy this style. So it's super nice. The real prompts, and you can't read this, but this is a leaked, allegedly GPT-4 prompt, and from their custom GPTs. The point I wanted to show you is that there are pages of instructions that people at OpenAI give when they write the prompts, right? You can see this one starts, you're an iterative prototype playground for developing a new GPT. These will prompt you with initial behavior. Your goal is to iteratively define and refine the parameters, update behavior. And it goes on and on and on. Pages of this thing. Avoid dots, avoid shadows, avoid things. Just lots of detail. So the real prompts to do these things are massive sets of instructions of what to do and what not to do. Because the thing is, it's read the entire web, but it doesn't necessarily have a lot of context, and it doesn't necessarily know what's in your head, and it doesn't necessarily have a lot of common sense.
And it's not really distinguishing between a prompt or instruction and anything else you type in, right? It just, but it knows, that do this or avoid are usually followed by statistically things that adhere to that.
Totally correct.
Okay.
All it is reading this long, long prompt, and then we start the conversation, and it statistically finds the most likely next word. And it has a big memory. It takes like, well, practically 5 pages of text. Impractically, the big ones like Gemini take entire books of text. So it takes a huge amount of background and then says statistically what's the next most likely thing. And you can see, if you look at this, that it's got things in bold. You must go through all of these steps in order, do not skip any steps. Why did OpenAI put that? Because the first time they tried it, it was skipping steps. And they went back and put the instructions in all caps. And 2 pages later, it's remembering, yeah, that person yelled at me in all caps to do all the steps. I'll try it, but it doesn't think that. It's just statistically more likely to follow all the steps. Bizarre, no?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's sort of magic, and it's unbelievable that it works as well as it does. But note that if you don't tell it to go through all the steps, if you give it too many instructions like a sort of a typical human, it'll forget the middle ones. It has, as a psychologist, I love it. It's got primacy and recency, pays more attention to the first thing you say and the last thing you say. And the longer you talk, the more the stuff in the middle all gets forgotten. Feel like I'm teaching an undergraduate again. It's like, okay, let me review the things I said you should do. And I do that when I write prompts. I treat it like a, freshman. It's like, okay, I said this before, but let me remind you what the things are that I said you should be doing. Cool. Good.
Mm-hmm.
There are also ways, which you guys are never going to worry about, of fine-tuning it, where you can give labels on outputs and say these are better or worse, and it can adjust the weights in it to try and be statistically more likely to give answers that you like. And there are a whole bunch of ways to do that, but mostly you don't want to do it. I'm going to skip some of these things, except to note that when Khan Academy, together with OpenAI consultants, tried to build something to give students help on math. First of all, they found that GPT tended to answer the students' questions helpfully. The students would say, what's the answer? And GPT would give the student the answer, which is not good teaching. I might point out that in therapy, it seems that often you don't want to give the patient the answer. You want to help them to find the answer themselves. We have the same problem with therapy bots. GPT is trained to be very helpful. And so you have to train it a little bit more to be less helpful or instruct it. The other piece that they trained GPT or Conmigo to do was to go through step by step and make out its own plans. Plan GPT, how should the student solve it? first, GPT says first divide by 6, then distribute the negative sign, then do this piece, then you should do that one. Then they trained up GPT to say, even though GPT, you figured this out, this is an internal thought, we're not going to show it to the student. So they're trying to get GPT to think in its head, but it only thinks by generating next words. Think in its head, generating a plan. Don't show the plan to the student. Then tell the student, ask the student the right question. So that's a little bit complicated, but bottom line summary, you want these systems to trick them into planning ahead, generating next words without revealing the plan to the student or the patient. And it took them 6 months of prompt engineering with smart guys from OpenAI and educational specialists from Khan Academy to get this thing to work. So getting these things to actually ask enough questions, but not too many, get them to plan ahead, but not too much. Lots of tricks if you're doing something other than just a simple conversation. The other piece to note is the early versions got simple math wrong. Now it gets them right because, in fact, if you ask it a question like 4 + 8 / 2, it'll write the code, call Python, compute the answer, and give you the answer. So it's smart enough for a lot of things now to go out to the web. And if I say, what time is it in San Francisco? It'll do a Bing query, because Bing is behind this, grab the time, return it. So for a lot of things, it's now gotten really smart in the sense of, I don't know the answer. Let me, I don't want to say Google it, but this is not Gemini Googles it. This one Bings it. You with me? This is a Microsoft product. So the Microsoft products go out and use Bing to find things. So it's gotten much better at checking out for answers. And now it does pretty good job of giving tutoring for math. And when student gives the wrong answer, saying, great, good thought. In this case, you don't need to do this. What else might you try? And by the way, I don't have examples in this talk, but for reframing, for cognitive behavioral therapy, really good. If you see black and white thinking, all our thinking, it's really good at recognizing it. It's really good at asking, okay, is that really true? Or, are you perhaps exaggerating? But it can say it better than I can. So quite good at recognizing lots of sort of simple cognitive errors, and if instructed, to politely nudge you toward finding it, helping you get back on track. Context matters. Skip the details, but if you want to have it follow a protocol for cognitive behavioral therapy, give it the protocol. Not just have it search the web, but give it as input. And so the modern systems are quite good, and GPT will let you, ChatGPT will let you upload a document, ask questions about the document. So you can give it more information, and it's getting better and better at searching through large chunks of information to find it. And this is called retrieval augmented generation, and we're going to skip the whole point except to note that these don't always work. So if you saw sort of a fun thing about a month ago, oh no, it's February, a couple months ago, Air Canada put together a chatbot to give advice to people who are buying airplane tickets. And somebody said, hey, can I get a bereavement fare? Because my mother died and I don't want to pay the full fare for Air Canada, which is extremely expensive to fly. Will you give me a discount? And the chatbot said yes. And in spite of the fact that's not Air Canada's official policy. Why did the chatbot say yes? Because if you look across the web over the last 20 years, most airlines in most conditions did have historically bereavement policies. They've mostly been canceling them and being more money oriented and less generous in terms of giving you that fare to go see your mother's funeral. And so the chatbot had this generalized knowledge that most airlines historically, because the data is historical, from the web, give bereavement fares. And when asked this question, they answered it in a way that's statistically plausible. even though that's actually not in Air Canada's policy, and even though Air Canada gave the chatbot access to their full policy. Does that make sense? And is it obvious why this might be problematic if you were, say, a doctor or a therapist? Given especially that it's trained on the web, which doesn't always have the best therapeutic advice, right? Cool. So to build these things, you need a lot more than just having a conversation. You need to build in the context. Who's talking to whom? What role is the chatbot playing? How much is it driving the conversation? How much is it answering it? You'd like it to remember across multiple sessions what's going on, which it's really bad at. They've just introduced that feature into GPT. Will remember your previous conversation. You like to give the chatbot a persona. If it's being a therapist, what sort of a therapist is it? What sort of a style? And I like very concretely, is it a 20-year-old? Is it a 60-year-old? There's different styles of talking. What kind of a therapist is it? Eclectic, CBT? What's the process? How long have you known this person? Is the first meeting? Is the later? So there's lots of information to give into it. So getting these things to work well requires being incredibly explicit about lots of things that you as a human know, because you know when you're meeting someone, why you're meeting them, what the background is, what they look like, how they got, there's lots of background, so you got to give it a lot of knowledge. There are lots of systems out there building personas for you, where there are companies that will take whatever background you want with your voice and your image and your last 1,000 tweets, and they'll be able to build a bot that then clones you. So you could be cloned as the therapist, or an influencer, whatever that means. I'm the wrong generation of what influencer is, but I study them. That's apparently what one looks like, according to the Washington Post. So you can build cloned systems that imitate styles. I'm building these for teachers and for friend bots. Sometimes a student wants to talk to another student. Sometimes a student wants to talk to a teacher. They have different personalities. I'm giving them backstories. How old, male or female? What's their approach to therapy? How formal? Figurative voice in terms of formality and enthusiasm and use. Khan Academy made their bots have lots of emoticons. They A/B tested, apparently, like tweens love emoticons when they're talking to bots. To me, it feels a lot, but hey, I'm not a tween, not my style. There are whole companies, again, that have optimized the crap out of this and do pretty good jobs building whatever character you want. So you'll see lots of these things being fine-tuned. But note that we're doing the same thing. If I'm building a patient, I want that patient to manifest with anxiety and depression, but I want it to be like a Marvel character, MCU sort of full backstory. How did they grow up? What did they experience? You with me? To have a convincing character, you want the backstory, you want the information, you want the context. So to sort of move towards summarizing, these things are really dumb assistants. They're incredibly good at simple things like search the web and find the results, or write Python code, or draw images in some style, or write letters, or reframe cognitive distortions. They're great for lots of simple things. They often mess up fairly simple things. Here's a fairly recent. I said, build an image of a nerd who is not wearing glasses. It's not very good at negation. It tends to forget the not, and statistically, somehow a nerd not wearing glasses often apparently looks like this nerd with glasses. Oops. I guess it looks pretty nerdy, sort of cool, right? I say redraw it with no glasses. It says the image already features a person without glasses, as per your initial request. Well, hello, it's got glasses. Would I like any other aspects of the image instead? Nope. So it says the image, again, not wearing glasses. And then I said, remove the books. And it removed the books, and it took off the glasses. So what's the moral? Statistically, nerds mostly have glasses, and apparently statistically, maybe people with books are more likely to have glasses. I don't know what. I don't know what's going on in its alien dumb head, but there's a nerd with no books. And when I try and build bots for education or therapy, it seems sort of similar. Mostly it's really great. It's friendly and cheery and warm and welcoming. And then occasionally I tell it not to do things and it still does them. And it's bad at anything that involves lots of planning ahead or lots of thinking ahead. And it's very bad at multi-step, do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. It's not good at something that's going to take an hour. It's great at things that are going to take a 5-minute conversation to do an intake interview. Cool. So where does this leave us? Great at routine one step, great for things like worksheets, practice reframing. It will give you feedback on anything you're working on. I'm not sure if there's a big win. We've been trying replacing some of the worksheets with chatbots. People like them, but I'm not sure they're learning anything more. So I think when it's useful is a little bit unclear in the current world. Currently very bad at planning, a little bit unreliable. And so I think in some sense, the way I see all of the people who are building things is they build in a high-level therapy structure, often supervised by a human therapist, and then use the GPT to fill in, auto-generate responses, do small intake interviews, practice something, right? So view this as a super cheap, easy to use assistant where you can have the assistant give her, the GPT, give it some background and have it do some task where the patient can go off and practice and play with things. So I think we'll see it gradually creeping up the slope from helping with math to helping with math anxiety. But I think it's gonna be a long time before it does therapy. But that said, the Wobot structure, which has built in the whole decision tree in advance with pre-framed pieces, will gradually be replaced with GPT at various levels. I think we saw a talk a couple months ago by Rachel, who's doing some of these sort of things at Northwestern, that I think this sort of mixture that says, what parts do you have to hand code? What parts can you build in? And rather than trying to make everything pre-scripted, you could at least have 3 minutes, 5 minutes of conversation that are completely open. No, sort of open is going to be really nice. So I'm sort of, optimistic and scared. But I think getting things that are a little more flexible, a little more attuned to you is going to be really nice. And it's going to make the programming of these things way easier. The same way that I think writing Python code is sort of fun and sort of annoying, but on the whole, I'm just happy to tell the program, take this CSV, plot it out like this, and give it detailed instructions. More and more, I'm building bots to do education therapy where I say, look it, here's the syllabus, here's the background, here's the style you want, go out, work with the student. If you get stuck, have the student reach out to me, whatever, right? So building these things that are programming in English. But a little bit of risk that you want it mostly in places where 95% accurate's okay. If it's occasionally stupid, maybe that's okay. And certainly for practicing homework, it's fine. For suicidal ideation, it's maybe not fine. Although what we're finding, I'm trying to give advice to GPs on when to send someone home or when to send them in for careful watching. GPs are clueless anyway about diagnosing the risk of suicidal ideation. I'm not sure my stupid system will be that much worse than they are, and at least might point out some things to worry about. And I'm going to try really hard never to say, my bot says you should do this. I'm going to say, my bot has read through all the doctor's notes and all these other pieces, and I found these 4 facts that I thought might indicate there's something you might want to look at, right? So framing it in a way that it provides relevant information, summarizing a huge amount of prior hospital visits and potential former suicide attempts or whatever, put that in a very brief summary, and then give it to the doctor so that she can actually decide, okay, based on that, here's my call, right? So mitigating the risk by leaving humans in the loop. Cool. So easy demos, give lots of context, don't trust the cool demos, hard to get the thing to work beautifully, manage expectations, and think, how do you make something where if it does mostly good, like plot this data, you can look at the plot and see if it makes sense. something where you can have it generate stuff for you and check it. I think the question is, in the therapy context, how do you feed in these idiot savant assistants into the process? And with that, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for, yes, thank you so much for all of that. It's really fascinating to know. I really appreciated going through like how bots actually think and what they take into account, so that we're all more informed about, you know, how to use these in the future in our work in mental health and work in therapy. And yeah, there's just so many possibilities and so many places that this can go. But thinking about it as this, you know, this really dumb savant or, you know, this alien creature that we're trying to figure out, I think was a really nice frame because.
I mean, you're all gonna be using this to help craft letters. Microsoft Word will come within a year or two with this built in as a feature, because hey, Microsoft owns the biggest piece of OpenAI, and there's lots of companies that are summarizing clinical notes and stuff. In the meantime, though, it's fun to play a little bit with, paste in the information about the patient and have it generate the first draft of the letter, and then read it pretty carefully, because often it's super plausible and sometimes it's great to send, and sometimes it's like, ooh, no, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah, careful checking is definitely the key there.
So I think the thing, careful checking, and the other thing, if you're teaching like I do, it's become much harder to grade student essays, because you used to be able to tell if someone was conceptually sloppy by their writing being sloppy. The great thing now is being a native speaker of English is super unimportant, because this thing does a great job of translating broken English into totally fluid English, which is awesome. I'm out of the proofreading game for my students. You know, run through Grammarly, run through GPT, I don't care. But it also means that students can be conceptually super sloppy, run through GPT and generate something that looks like a beautifully formatted, clever treatment plan when they A, haven't thought about it, and B, haven't read it to make sure it makes any sense.
Yeah, so authenticity in this context, like how do you know?
So it's super hard to tell. And there's a bunch of companies selling devices, systems that will check to see whether this is GPT generated. None of them work. They're all fraudulent. OpenAI tried one for like 3 weeks and then took it off their site because it worked so badly. They were embarrassed to have it. So all these companies that say we can detect whether a student was using this, no, they can't. They're just wrong.
Yeah, all the other technologies need to sort of catch up with where we're up to with, you know, GPT. Gosh. Okay, well, I know we're out of
We're at the hour, but thank
time.
you all. If you're building chatbots, feel free to reach out. I'm building a lot of technology to do these, and I think you'll have the pleasure and the pain of playing with them all soon.
Well, thank you again. Next month, just to let everyone know, we have Dr. Taylor Burke coming. She's an assistant professor at Harvard University and Massachusetts General Hospital. She's going to be talking about computer vision suicide, a project she's working on with that. So looking forward to seeing you next month. Thank you again, Lyle, for coming. And we will be recording these, so we'll put this up on our YouTube channel and send out the link.
Great. Awesome. And thank you all. Thanks for the great questions.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Bye, everyone.